Take the money, girl. He's dying. Nobody's gonna know. Lily Carter stood frozen, $22,000 in her hands. A dying man's entire life savings spread across a dirty motel mattress, and the only witness was a man already planning to steal it himself. She had $90 to her name, no home, no family, no future, and she was about to make the most dangerous choice of her life. If this story already has your heart pounding, hit subscribe, drop your city in the comments right now because I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Stay with me. Every word of this matters. The day started the way most of Lily Carter's days started, with nothing. Not the dramatic, poetic kind of nothing that people write songs about. The real kind. The kind where you wake up before sunrise because the warmth you were borrowing from a bus station bench is gone, replaced by the specific cold that creeps into your bones when you have nowhere else to go. The kind of nothing where your stomach has stopped growling because it gave up expecting an answer. She was 19 years old. She had a backpack with 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush she'd found still in its packaging at a truck stop, and $90 in crumpled bills she kept folded inside her left shoe because it was safer there than anywhere else. She had her hands, which were rough and red-knuckled from cleaning other people's messes. And she had something most people in her situation eventually lose, a stubborn, almost irrational sense of her own self. Call it pride, call it stupidity. Lily Carter called it the only thing she had left. The Desert Sun Motel sat off Route 10 between nowhere and somewhere worse, a 2-story strip of rooms that had seen better decades. The kind of place where the vacancy sign had 1 letter burnt out and nobody fixed it because the vacancy was permanent anyway. Truckers stopped here. People running from something stopped here. People with nowhere else to go stopped here. Lily had been cleaning rooms there for 11 days cash at the end of each shift. No paperwork, no questions, and that arrangement suited her just fine. Rick Danner owned the place, or managed it. The distinction didn't matter much in practice because Rick moved through the Desert Sun Motel like a man who owned everything in it, including the people. He was 53 heavy in the way that comes from years of standing still, while everyone else moved with small eyes that never quite looked at you straight on. He smiled a lot. That was the thing about Rick. He smiled constantly, and easy, and Lily had learned in her first hour on the job that his smile meant absolutely nothing. Smile don't cost nothing, her grandmother used to say, back when Lily had a grandmother, back when she had a lot of things. It's what a man does when the smile drops that tells you who he is. She'd been thinking about her grandmother more than usual lately. Maybe it was the desert heat. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the fact that she was 19 years old and completely alone in the world. And sometimes at night, when there was nothing to do but feel things, she allowed herself to miss the people who were gone. But mornings were for working. Mornings were for keeping her head down. She was on room 14 by 8:30. Standard procedure: strip the bed bag. The linens, wipe the bathroom vacuum if the vacuum cooperated. Remake everything tight and fresh. She'd gotten fast at it. Fast enough that Rick had started giving her 2 sections instead of 1, which meant more work for the same pay, which was the kind of mathematics Rick excelled at. She hadn't pushed back. You don't push back when you need the key. You smile, and you do the extra rooms, and you count your 90 at the end of the day, and you figure out tomorrow when tomorrow comes. Room 14 had been occupied by a man who'd left in a hurry. That much was clear before she even got the door fully open. The bed was wrecked, not slept in wrecked, but thrashed like someone had been fighting against something in the night. And the mattress had been the battlefield. The lamp on the nightstand was knocked sideways. There was a water glass on the floor unbroken. And there was a smell, not the usual smell of stale air and cheap soap, but something medicinal underneath that, something darker. Lily set her cart outside and got to work. She started with the bathroom because she always started with the bathroom. Gloves on spray, down the surfaces, scrub the tub, clean the mirror, replace the little wrap soaps that nobody ever used but Rick counted religiously. She moved efficiently, without thinking too hard about it, the way you learn to move when your body knows a job well enough to do it without your whole mind. It was when she came back to strip the bed that she found it. She pulled the fitted sheet first the way she always did, working from the corners. The mattress shifted with the motion lighter than it should have been. She registered that somewhere in the back of her mind, and when she grabbed the corner nearest the wall and tugged, the mattress slid 2 inches to the left. And there it was, an envelope. Thick, brown, taped shut with a kind of frantic layered tape that meant whoever sealed it didn't trust a single strip to hold. Lily stood there for a moment, just stood there. In 11 days of cleaning rooms, she had found a wedding ring. She'd turned it into Rick. $14 in loose change, she'd turned that in too, except 3/4 she needed for a vending machine, and had planned to replace a prescription bottle with someone's name on it, turned it in, and a child's drawing of a horse that had made her inexplicably sad. She'd kept that one folded in her backpack for reasons she couldn't explain. She was not a thief. She wanted to be very clear about that, with herself standing in room 14 with the morning sun starting to press through the curtains. She was not a thief. She turned things in. That was who she was. But her hands picked up the envelope anyway. Just to look. Just to feel how heavy it was. It was heavy. She held it for 3 seconds. She counted because her brain was doing that thing it did when it was trying to hold something still so it could look at it. 3 seconds. And then she set it on the nightstand and went back to stripping the bed because that was the job and she was going to do the job. Except she couldn't stop looking at it. The tape was peeling at one corner. Not pulled open, just failing the way tape fails in dry heat. And through that corner, she could see the edge of paper. Green paper. She told herself later that she only opened it to confirm what it was so she could turn it in properly. She told herself that. Whether she believed it completely is another matter. She opened the envelope, $22,000. She counted it 3 times. Her fingers were shaking by the second count, and by the third she had to sit down on the bare mattress because her legs had decided that standing was no longer part of the plan. $22,000 in mixed bills, mostly 50s and 100s, wrapped in 2 rubber bands that had dried and cracked in the heat. $22,000. Lily's entire financial life to this point could be summarized in numbers that never exceeded 3 digits. Her best week cleaning rooms had netted her $340. The most cash she'd held at one time since she'd been on her own was $600, and she'd been so terrified of losing it that she'd sewn it into the lining of her backpack and slept with the pack as a pillow for 3 weeks. $22,000. She sat on that bare mattress and she looked at that money and she felt the full specific weight of what it meant. Not in an abstract way, not in a someday way, in a right now, this morning, this moment way. She could be gone before Rick finished his coffee. She could be in Phoenix by noon. She could have an apartment, a real one, with a lease and a key and a door that locked from the inside within a week. She could have food that wasn't gas station shelves and whatever the church on 5th Street put out on Wednesday mornings. She could have a bus ticket somewhere real, somewhere with jobs, somewhere that wasn't a dead-end motel off a highway that most people only drove through on their way to somewhere better. She could have a life. The thought sat in her chest like something physical, like a stone, like a door. She was still sitting there when she heard the commotion outside. At first, it was just noise-raised voices, the kind that happen in motel parking lots often enough that they barely register. But then she heard the words cutting through the thin walls, not breathing right. Get his legs up. Call 911. Somebody call. Lily went to the window. In the parking lot below room 14, 3 men she'd never seen before were gathered around a figure on the ground. The figure was a large man, enormous, actually wide-shouldered and heavy, even lying down, wearing a leather vest covered in patches. A motorcycle sat on his kickstand nearby, still ticking as the engine cooled. One of the men was on a phone. The other 2 were crouched over the big man on the ground, one of them talking in a low, urgent voice. Jack, hey, stay with me. Jack, open your eyes. And the big man's eyes were opening and closing like something that required tremendous effort. Jack. She didn't know him. She'd never seen him before. But she was looking at an envelope with $22,000 in it, and there was a man named Jack collapsed in the parking lot below. And she had been on this earth long enough to understand when 2 things were connected. She tucked the envelope into the front of her cleaning cart under a pile of fresh towels, and she walked downstairs without knowing quite what she intended to do. By the time she got to the parking lot, the paramedics were already there. Fast, unusually fast, she thought. And then she heard someone say that a trucker passing through had called it in 3 minutes before it happened, when the big man had pulled in and nearly fell off his bike in the parking lot. She stood at the edge of what was happening and watched them work on Jack Mercer. She didn't know his name yet. She learned it from the paramedic who was talking to one of the leather-vested men in clipped, efficient sentences. Your friend Jack Mercer, he conscious when you found him. How long has he been having symptoms? Does he have a history of cardiac? Jack Mercer, Jack Iron Wolf. Mercer she'd learn later, though she didn't know the Iron Wolf part yet. Right now, he was just Jack, and he was being loaded onto a gurney with the particular efficiency that meant it was serious, and the men who had been with him were pacing and arguing in low voices about who was going to follow the ambulance and who was going to stay with the bikes. She almost stepped forward. She almost said something. I found money in room 14. Is it his? But something stopped her. Maybe Rick was watching. Maybe she wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. Maybe she needed a minute to understand what she was going to do before she opened her mouth and made it real. She went back upstairs. She stood in room 14 with the envelope on the nightstand again, and she looked at it. Take the money, girl. She didn't hear a voice. She wasn't the kind of person who heard voices, but she heard the logic of it clearly enough. He might not make it. You need it more than whoever inherits it. You could be gone in 10 minutes. Nobody saw you find it. Nobody has to know. She was 19 years old. She was homeless. She had 90 in her left shoe and a job that paid her in cash because she didn't have a permanent address to put on a W-2. Nobody would know. She picked up the envelope, and that was exactly when the door opened. Rick Danner didn't knock. Rick Danner never knocked on rooms while they were being cleaned. That was just a thing. He did a power thing, a reminder of whose space this was. He came in with his ring of keys jangling and his smile already in place, the one that didn't reach his eyes, and his eyes went immediately to the envelope in Lily's hands. The smile didn't drop. It shifted, became something different, something interested. Well, he said, just that, just well, and he pulled the door closed behind him. Found something, he said. Lily's hands tightened around the envelope. I was going to turn it in. Sure you were. He took 2 steps into the room, slow and casual, like they had all the time in the world. How much? She said nothing. Come on, Lily, I'm not going to bite you. How much is in there? There. She said nothing. Because here's the thing, Rick said, and his voice dropped into a register she hadn't heard from him before, lower, conversational, almost kind, which was worse somehow than if he'd been angry. That man, Jack, whoever he is, he's gone. Went out in an ambulance, probably isn't coming back. And if he does come back, he's going to be too far gone to even remember what room he was in. So that money, he nodded at the envelope, is just sitting there, not belonging to anybody in particular, which is a situation that deserves a practical solution. It belongs to him, a dying man. He's not dead. Lily, Rick tilted his head, that smile. I've been running this place for 14 years. You know how many people have left things behind? You know how many of them ever came back for it? Money, jewelry, phones, things people care about, and they're gone. And nobody comes back because life moved on. I was moving as he talked, not toward her specifically, but around the room, touching the lamp, straightening it, picking up the water glass from the floor, and setting it on the dresser. Small proprietary motions that reminded her of every inch of this place was his. I'll tell you what I think is fair, he said. You give me the envelope, I keep it safe, and at the end of today, I give you $500 of it, and we forget this conversation happened. Lily looked at him. $500, he said again, like the number would grow on her with repetition. On top of today's pay, that's not nothing. No, she said, the smile held. No to which part? No to all of it. Something moved through his eyes fast, cold gone, so quickly she almost missed it. But she'd been reading rooms her whole life, rooms and people. And what she saw in Rick Danner's eyes in that quarter second before the smile reasserted itself was enough to make her take a small step backward. You're making a mistake, he said pleasantly. I'm turning in the money, she said, to the hospital, to whoever is responsible for him. You don't even know who he is. His name is Jack Mercer. I heard the paramedics. Rick looked at her for a long moment. You're a homeless girl, he said finally. Not almost conversational, like he was explaining geography. You don't have an address. You don't have ID. You don't have a bank account. You don't have a single piece of paper in this world that says you exist as a legitimate person. And you want to walk into a hospital and say you found $20-something thousand and you're returning it out of the goodness of your heart. She felt the words land. She felt them. They're going to ask questions, Rick said. They're going to want to know who you are and where you're from and what you were doing in that room. And when you can't answer those questions, when the only answer you have is, I'm a homeless girl, cleaning rooms for cash, they are going to look at you like you're a thief, not a hero, a thief. She was quiet. Give me the envelope, Lily. Her hands were shaking. She could feel it, a fine tremor running from her wrists to her elbows, the specific vibration of her body registering something her mind was still processing. She thought about $22,000. She thought about an apartment. She thought about her grandmother saying it's what a man does when the smile drops. She thought about a big man on the ground in the parking lot with two guys crouched over him saying, "Stay with me, Jack." She thought about what kind of person she was. She thought about whether she actually knew the answer to that. I need to finish the room, she said. Rick looked at her for a beat that felt much longer than it was. Don't do something stupid, he said, pleasantly. I'd hate to have to let you go over a misunderstanding. He left. The door closed. Lily stood in room 14 with $22,000 in her hands and her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had maybe 20 minutes before Rick came back, or told someone else to come back, or made a phone call that made her situation significantly more complicated. She understood that the way you understand a closed door in a burning building, not as theory, but as immediate physical fact. She put the envelope inside her shirt, against her skin, where she could feel the edges of it with every breath. She finished stripping the bed. She finished the bathroom. She made the bed back up tight corners the way she'd been taught. She gathered her cleaning supplies. And then she walked out of room 14, past her cart, down the stairs, past the spot in the parking lot where Jack Mercer had fallen across the lot and onto the road. She didn't run. Running attracts attention. Running means guilt. She walked steady, purposeful, the way she'd learned to walk through spaces where she wasn't supposed to be, with just enough confidence to suggest she belonged. She walked for 4 blocks before she let herself breathe all the way. Then she stopped, leaned against a concrete wall, and put her hand flat against her chest where the envelope was, and she felt the edges of it, and she said out loud to nobody, to the Arizona morning, okay. Just that. Just okay. Like she was answering a question she'd been asked before she was ready. Like she was making peace with something she'd already decided without quite deciding it. $22,000. She started walking toward the hospital. She didn't know the city well. She'd been here 11 days, and most of those days had been spent in the motel or in the immediate blocks around it. But she'd passed a hospital sign on the bus that had dropped her here, and she knew roughly which direction she'd come from, and she had a decent sense of cardinal directions from years of sleeping outside where you learn the sun. She walked. The morning got hotter. She didn't have water. She hadn't eaten since the night before, half a sandwich she'd bought from the gas station 2 blocks from the motel, the cheap kind with the hard bread and the processed meat that didn't taste like much but had enough calories to matter. Her shoes weren't good walking shoes. They were work shoes, flat-soled and worn thin, and she could feel the heat of the asphalt through the soles before the morning was even properly underway. She walked anyway. There was a part of her, she was honest enough with herself to acknowledge it, that kept making its case. You could stop. You could take a bus anywhere. Tucson, Flagstaff, LA. New York if you wanted, you have the money for it. You could be someone else by nightfall. You could have a tomorrow that doesn't look like today. And there was another part of her, quieter but steadier, that just kept walking toward the hospital and didn't engage with the debate. She'd had a foster parent once, she'd had many, but this one had been different, a woman named Carol who had lasted almost 3 years before circumstances changed. The way circumstances always changed, and Carol had told her something she'd never forgotten. She'd said, the thing about your character is it's not who you are when things are easy. It's who you are when you're standing at the hardest door. That's the real you. That's the version of you that you have to live with. Lily had been 14 when Carol said that. She hadn't fully understood it then. She understood it now. She was standing at the hardest door she'd ever stood at, and the real her was walking down a desert highway with $22,000 against her skin and $90 in her shoe, and no particular plan except to do the right thing and deal with whatever came after. 45 minutes later, she could see the hospital. She stopped at a gas station to drink from the water fountain outside, tilting her head under the tepid stream and drinking longer than she should have, feeling it hit her empty stomach hold. And then she straightened up, pressed her hand flat against her chest one more time, and walked the last 2 blocks. The automatic doors slid open and swallowed her whole. The emergency department at Desert Valley Medical Center was the particular organized chaos of a Thursday morning with people moving in all directions in a check-in desk manned by a woman who looked like she had been answering difficult questions since before Lily was born. Lily stood just inside the doors for a moment, taking it in. She must have looked like she needed help because a young man in scrubs appeared at her elbow and said, "Can I help you find someone?" "A man was brought in this morning," she said. "Jack Mercer, by ambulance, from the Desert Sun Motel." The man in scrubs looked at her with carefully neutral concern, the look that hospital staff develop after years of seeing every possible permutation of human trouble walk through the doors. "Are you family?" "No," she said, "but I need to speak to whoever is handling his belongings, or his next of kin if there is one. I found something that belongs to him." "Found something?" "Yes." He studied her for a moment. She was aware of what she looked like. She was aware that she had walked nearly 4 miles in 90-degree heat, and that the hours of that walk were visible on her, and that she was 19 years old and clearly not the kind of person hospitals typically dealt with under the heading of returning lost property. She was aware of everything Rick had said about how this would look. She looked back at the man in scrubs, and she said clearly, "My name is Lily Carter. I was cleaning his room at the Desert Sun Motel when he was taken by ambulance. I found an envelope with money in it under his mattress. I've walked here to return it. I don't want anything for it. I just need to make sure it gets to him or to whoever is responsible for him." Silence. The man in scrubs said, "Wait right here," and disappeared. She waited. She waited for 11 minutes. She counted those two, standing just inside the automatic doors with the cool air of the hospital pressing against her sweated skin and the envelope solid against her chest. A security guard positioned the edge of her peripheral vision, not approaching, just present, which told her that the man in scrubs had said something to someone who had said something to someone else. A woman appeared, 40s business casual with an ID badge that said patient services in the particular composed expression of someone who dealt with complicated situations for a living. "Miss Carter?" "Yes." "You have something that belongs to Mr. Mercer?" "Yes." She pulled the envelope from her shirt. It was warm from being against her body. She held it out. $22,000. "I found it under his mattress in room 14. I counted it. It's all there." The woman took the envelope with both hands. She looked at it. She looked at Lily. "You walked here from the motel?" "Yes." "That's almost 4 miles. I don't have a car." The woman held the envelope and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I needed to get some information from you. Is that all right?" "Yes." They sat in a small office off the main corridor. The woman, her name was Janet. She said Janet Flores took down Lily's name and what she knew about herself, which was limited. No fixed address, no ID, beyond an expired state ID, from a state she hadn't lived in for 2 years. No phone number, no contact information. Janet wrote everything down without comment. "Can I ask why you came?" Janet said when she'd finished writing. The question surprised Lily. It was so direct. "Because it's his money," she said. "A lot of people would have kept it." "I know. You didn't think about it." Lily looked at her. "I thought about it the whole way here." Janet looked at her for a long moment, a look that was harder to read than most, like she was doing an internal calculation that had nothing to do with paperwork. Then she nodded once. "Mr. Mercer is critical," she said. "He's in the ICU. I can't give you any more information than that, but I'm going to make sure this gets documented, your name, what you found, what you did. That's going to be on record." "You don't need to do anything for me," Lily said. "I know I don't," Janet said. "I'm doing it anyway." Lily walked back out through the automatic doors into the Arizona heat. She felt lighter, physically lighter, which didn't make sense because she was 4 miles from where she was supposed to be, and she had no job and $87 because she'd used 3/4 on that vending machine water at the gas station and hadn't replaced them. She had nothing but the same backpack she'd left with that morning. But she felt lighter. She walked back. She took a different route on the return, not because she planned to, but because she turned wrong at the first intersection and didn't correct it. Just let her feet find the way, which took her past a park where an old man was throwing bread to pigeons and 2 small children were running in that purely purposeful way small children run, like motion is its own destination. She stopped and watched them for a moment, just a moment, then she kept walking. She got back to the motel at 12:47, Rick Danner was standing in the parking lot. He was talking to a man she didn't recognize, lean 50s, sunburned with the particular stillnesses of someone who is trying very hard not to move. Rick's smile was in place. Rick's hands were in his pockets. Rick looked up when Lily crossed the lot, and his smile went through its transformation so fast she'd have missed it if she hadn't been watching for it. "There she is," Rick said, not loudly, almost warmly. Lily walked toward them. "This is Dale," Rick said. "Opa." "He helps out sometimes. Dale, this is Lily. She was cleaning rooms this morning when our guest had his episode." He looked at Lily. "I was worried about you. You disappeared." "I went for a walk," she said. "Long walk. I needed air." Rick's eyes moved to her shirt, to where the envelope had been, specifically with the kind of accuracy that meant he'd been thinking about exactly that location for the last 2 hours. His expression processed the absence and recalculated. "You do what you were going to do," he said. "Yes," she said. He studied her for 3 seconds. Then he smiled, the real smile drop, the one her grandmother warned her about, and said, "You're fired, Lily. Pack your things." She had known it was coming. She'd known it from the moment she walked out of room 14. She had walked 4 miles in the heat to return a dying man's money, and she had known what she was walking back to. She had done it anyway. "Okay," she said. "And if anyone asks," Rick said still pleasantly, "you left with the money and we never found it. I'll tell them you were only here a week. No records of you, no cash receipts, nothing tying you to this place. The way I tell it, you found that envelope and you ran." She looked at him. "You think the hospital is going to believe a homeless girl with no ID," he said. "You think old Jack's biker friends are going to take your word over mine? I've been here 14 years. Who are you?" She picked up her backpack from the cleaning supply closet where she'd left it that morning. She came back through the lobby, and Rick was still there, still smiling, and she walked past him without stopping. "Nobody'll believe you," he called after her. She kept walking. She got 2 blocks away before she let herself feel it, all of it, the exhaustion and the fear and the anger and something else underneath those, something that wasn't quite pride but was adjacent to it, something that felt like being whole. She sat down on the curb with her backpack between her feet and her face in her hands, and she breathed, in and out. The heat pressed down on her, and the cars moved past her, and the world continued its business with absolute indifference to the 19-year-old girl sitting on a curb with $87 and nowhere to go. She breathed. She had no job. She had no room. She had nothing. She had done the right thing. She sat on that curb for a long time, and she thought about what came next, and she didn't have an answer. She thought about Jack Mercer in the ICU and the envelope in Janet Flores's hands and whether any of it would reach him. She thought about Rick's smile and the story he was already telling, and the way the world tends to believe the person with 14 years in a building over the person with a backpack in a curb. She thought about Carol saying, "That's the version of you that you have to live with." She could live with this one. She stood up, put the backpack on, and started walking. She didn't know yet what was coming. She didn't know about the riders. She didn't know what 3 days would look like, what sound it would make when 150 motorcycles hit a motel parking lot simultaneously, what it feels like to have people come looking for you, not to take something, but to give something back. She didn't know any of that. She just walked, and the desert held her, and the sun kept moving, and somewhere across town, in a hospital room full of machines and careful sounds, a man named Jack Mercer opened his eyes. She slept behind a laundromat that night. Not because it was comfortable. It wasn't. The concrete was uneven, and the exhaust fan from the dryers blew hot air that smelled like fabric softener and burnt lint. But because it was tucked away enough that nobody would bother her, and after the day she'd had not being bothered was the closest thing to luxury she could reach. She'd found it before dark, which mattered. Finding a place after dark meant moving through streets where being a young woman alone was a different kind of dangerous, and Lily had learned early that daylight was her friend in ways that had nothing to do with being able to see. Daylight meant invisibility of a different kind. A girl walking in daylight is just a girl walking. A girl walking after midnight is a problem waiting to be defined by whoever finds her. So she'd found the laundromat. She'd eaten a pack of peanut butter crackers from the gas station and drank water from the fountain outside, and she'd settled in behind the building with her backpack as a pillow, same as always. and she'd stared up at the desert sky and thought about exactly nothing for as long as she could manage it. She lasted about 4 minutes before the thinking started. The money kept appearing in her mind. Not as regret, she was clear on that. She checked specifically the way you press on a bruise to understand its edges. Not regret, but the number kept surfacing anyway. 22,000, an apartment, a bus ticket, a new beginning. The specific weight of the envelope against her skin on that 4-mile walk, the warmth of it, the way she'd had to consciously remind herself to breathe normally. She pressed her hand flat against her chest, now where the envelope had been, and felt nothing but her own heartbeat. Good, she thought. That's the right answer. She slept eventually. She always slept eventually. Morning came the way it always did, without permission, without consideration, all at once, and too bright. She was up before 6 because a delivery truck parked nearby, and the driver's radio was playing something country and loud, and she sat up stiff-backed and blinked at the alley around her and did her inventory the way she always did. First thing, backpack intact, shoes still on wallet, still in her left shoe, body present and accounted for. $87. 1 day out from getting fired. She stood up, shouldered the pack, and started thinking practically. There were 2 things she needed immediately: food and a job lead. Food she could manage. There was a church 3 blocks from the motel that did a free breakfast on Fridays, and this was Friday, so that was handled. The job lead was harder. She'd been operating on cash and carry the whole time she'd been in this city, cleaning mostly the kind of work that doesn't require a resume or a reference, just a willingness to show up and get dirty. That market existed everywhere, but it required knowing where to look, and she'd spent 11 days building that knowledge around the Desert Sun Motel, which was now unavailable to her. Start over. She'd started over before. She was walking toward the church when she heard her name, or thought she did. She stopped, turned, a street she half recognized, a sidewalk with a few early pedestrians, a bus stop. Nobody looking at her. She'd probably imagined it. Her name was common enough that her brain sometimes snagged on strangers saying Lily or really or anything with those syllables. She kept walking. Breakfast at the church was scrambled eggs in toast and coffee that had been sitting too long, but was hot, which was what mattered. She ate at a table with an older man named George who didn't want to talk, and a young mother with twin toddlers who didn't have time to talk, and the silence suited her. She ate everything on her tray and drank the bad coffee and stared at the table and made a list in her head. Look for cleaning work near the hospital district. Medical buildings needed daily cleaning, consistent work. Check the community board at the library for day labor listings. Figure out tonight's situation before it was tonight. She was reaching for the empty coffee cup when the young woman sat down across from her. She appeared without warning. Late 20s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a gray hoodie despite the heat, with the kind of energy that fills a space before the person does. She sat down, put her elbows on the table, and looked at Lily directly. "You're Lily Carter," she said. Not a question. Lily's hand stopped on the coffee cup. "Who are you?" "My name is Sandra. I work at Desert Valley Medical. Patient services, night shift." She paused. "I was there when Janet took your statement yesterday." Lily looked at her. "Okay. I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Sandra leaned forward slightly. "Did you take anything from that envelope before you brought it in?" The question hit like cold water. Lily set the coffee cup down carefully. "No. I have to ask because—" "No," Lily said again, flat, clear. "I counted it 3 times, $22,000. I brought it all in. I didn't take a single dollar." Sandra held her gaze for a moment, like she was weighing the answer against something internal. Then she nodded once. "Okay. Why are you asking me this at a church breakfast table?" "Because someone came into the hospital this morning claiming you took money from a patient's room," Sandra said. "Said you'd been stealing from rooms during your cleaning shifts for weeks. Said the envelope you brought in was only part of what you found and you kept the rest." The dining hall noise continued around them, the clink of trays, the murmur of conversation, the toddlers across the table egging over a piece of toast, and Lily sat in the middle of all of it, feeling like the floor had dropped 6 inches. "Rick Danner," she said. "You know the name. He's the motel manager. He's the one who pressured me to give him the money. He's the one who fired me when I brought it in instead." She kept her voice level. "He's lying." "I believe you," Sandra said. "Then why?" "Because believing you and being able to do anything about it are 2 different things. Sandra looked down at the table for a moment, then back up. He filed a report with the police this morning, said you'd been pocketing cash from rooms for the duration of your employment, said he kept records. He paid me in cash. There are no records, which also means there's no proof he paid you legitimately. It cuts both ways. Lily felt the specific nausea of understanding something that has been designed to trap you. Rick hadn't just fired her. He hadn't just lied. He'd built a cage around her while she was gone, and now she was walking back into it. What happens now, she said. The police may want to talk to you, Sandra said. I don't know how seriously they're taking it, but you should know it's out there. She paused. I'm not here officially. I'm here because I did this job for 6 years, and I've seen what happens to people who do the right thing and don't have anyone in their corner when the wrong people start talking. Lily looked at her. Why do you care? Sandra was quiet for a moment. I was 22 and homeless once, she said, and somebody helped me when they didn't have to. She pushed back from the table. Just be careful, and if you can get anyone to corroborate any part of your story, anyone who saw you leave, anyone who saw you at the hospital, anything, get it. She was gone as quickly as she'd arrived. Lily sat with the empty coffee cup and the remains of her breakfast in the specific settling weight of what had just happened. She'd returned $22,000. She'd walked 4 miles in the heat to do it. She'd lost her job and her cash income and her temporary sleeping arrangement doing it. And now she was sitting in a church dining hall being told that the man she'd refused to steal with had reported her for stealing. She sat with that for exactly 1 minute. Then she picked up her backpack and walked out. Because sitting with it wasn't going to fix anything. Because the only directions available to her were forward, and self-pity wasn't one of them. Because she had been in impossible situations before, and she was still here, which was evidence enough that impossible was a word other people used for things she had not yet decided were impossible. She went to the library. The Phoenix Public Library, branch closest to her, was 8 blocks away, and it was open at 9, which was 30 minutes from now. So she sat outside on the steps in the warming morning, and she thought carefully about what she had. She had nothing except her own account of events in the name Janet Flores and the name Sandra, and the fact that she'd walked into a hospital and handed over an envelope and given her name clearly and let it be documented. The documentation was the only thing she had. It was the record of what she'd actually done written in a hospital system time-stamped. The question was whether that record would be enough against a man who'd been in one place for 14 years and had she now understood been running a small and very quiet operation of exploitation for at least that long. She was still turning this over when her name was called again. This time it was real. A police cruiser had pulled to the curb in front of the library steps, and the officer who got out was young, maybe 25, 26, with the expression of someone who has been given a task they're not entirely sure about. He looked at his notebook, then at her. Lily Carter, she stood up slowly. Yes. I'm Officer Reyes. I need to ask you a few questions about an incident at the Desert Sun Motel. She thought about running. She thought about it clearly and without drama, the way you think about a door. It's there, it's an option. What happens if I go through it? And then she thought about what running would look like, what it would mean, what Rick Danner's story would become if she ran from a police officer in front of a library. Okay, she said. Okay. They sat in the back of his cruiser, which was cool from the air conditioning, and he asked his questions carefully like he was trying to be fair. What was she doing at the motel? How long had she been employed there? Did she enter room 14? Did she find an envelope? She answered everything directly. She told him exactly what had happened in the order it happened, without embellishment and without minimizing. She told him about Rick pressuring her. She told him about walking to the hospital. She told him about Janet Flores and the documentation and her name on the record. He wrote things down. His expression stayed neutral. Mr. Danner says you were seen leaving the property with the envelope. I was leaving the property with the envelope, she said. I was walking it to the hospital. I walked 4 miles. You can check the timestamp on the hospital's intake record in the distance from the motel. The math works out. He looked at her. I don't have anything to gain from lying to you, she said. I already gave the money back. The only thing I get from lying is trouble I don't need. You can't prove you didn't take some of it before you brought it in. Can he prove I did? Silence. I'm not accusing you of anything, Ms. Carter, Reyes said. I'm telling you what's being alleged. I know what's being alleged, and I'm telling you what happened. She looked out the window of the cruiser at the library steps where she'd been sitting. I'm 19 years old. I'm homeless. I don't have a lawyer or an address or a phone number. I'm aware of how this looks. I'm also aware that I walked 4 miles in 90-degree heat to return money I could have kept and nobody would have known. People don't do that if they're trying to get away with something. Reyes looked at her for a long moment. Janet Flores at Desert Valley Medical, she said. That's who documented my intake. Call her. He did right there in the cruiser. He called, got transferred, waited, spoke to someone, waited again. Lily sat in the back and looked at her hands in her lap and breathed steadily. He hung up. The hospital confirms you came in at approximately 10:15 yesterday morning. Confirms you provided an envelope identified as containing currency. Confirms you provided your name and a statement of circumstances. Yes. It doesn't confirm the amount. Then call the hospital's accounting or wherever money from patients goes. They counted it. Another call, another wait. She watched a pigeon land on the library railing and immediately walked sideways like it was pretending it hadn't meant to land there. Reyes hung up again. $22,040, he said. They counted it when it was secured. 22,000, she said. I said 22,000. I miscounted the 40, or it was already loose in the envelope. I just counted the banded portion. She paused. If I'd skimmed from the envelope, why would I bring in more than I said? He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not quite belief, but the recalibration that happens when the math stops adding up the wrong way. I'm not going to hold you, he said, but I need a way to reach you if I have further questions. I don't have a phone. I don't have a fixed address. Is there somewhere you'll be in the next few days? I'll be in this neighborhood, she said. I'll check back with the library. You can leave a message for me here. I'll come in daily. He wrote something on a card and gave it to her. His number. If anything else comes up regarding this situation, anything at all, call me. She took the card. She got out of the cruiser. She stood on the sidewalk and watched him drive away. Then she sat back down on the library steps and put her face in her hands and let herself have 30 seconds of being completely undone. Not crying, she hadn't cried in a long time, not because she was hard, but because crying required a private place she rarely had access to. But 30 seconds of just feeling the full weight of it, the exhaustion, the unfairness, the specific loneliness of being a person that the world defaulted to disbelieving. 30 seconds, she counted. Then she stood up. The library opened, and she went inside and used the community board and the public computers and spent 4 hours working the problem of her immediate survival with the focused, methodical energy of someone who has survived before by refusing to be overwhelmed for more than 30 seconds at a time. By 2 in the afternoon, she had a lead on day labor cleaning work at a medical office building 4 miles west, the kind of place that hired day laborers and paid at the end of the shift. She had the name of a shelter 3 blocks south that had a women's floor with open beds on a first-come basis. And she had something else. She'd sent an email from the library's public terminal to the address on Officer Reyes's card, laying out in careful, methodical detail the full account of what had happened at the Desert Sun Motel over the past 11 days. Not just the envelope, the cash payment arrangement, the pressure Rick applied, the threats, the firing, all of it documented in writing with timestamps where she had them. She didn't know if it would matter. She didn't know if anybody would read it and do anything. But she'd sent it, and it existed. And that was one more thing in the world that said, I was here and this is what happened, and it was true. She walked to the medical office building to check on the job lead. She got the work. Afternoon shift, 4 hours the building. Super didn't ask questions, and neither did she. Her body remembered how to clean on autopilot, and she did the 4 hours efficiently, and at the end she had $60 in a handshake and an offer to come back tomorrow if she wanted. I'll be here, she said. She went to the shelter. It was better than the laundromat alley and worse than a real room, and it smelled like disinfectant and institutional cooking and too many people sharing not enough space, which was a smell she knew down to her cells. She got a bed, a real one with a pillow, and she lay on it that night and stared at the ceiling and thought about Jack Mercer in his hospital room. She wondered if he was still alive. She hadn't asked when she was in the hospital. She'd been so focused on getting the money to the right person that she hadn't thought to ask the question she probably should have asked first. She knew he was in the ICU. She knew it was serious. She knew from the sound of the paramedics' voices that serious wasn't being used loosely. She found herself hoping, not in a complicated way, just the simple, direct hope that a person sends out into the universe when they want something to be okay. She hoped Jack Mercer was still alive. She hoped the money would find its way to him. She hoped whatever the money was for, whatever it meant to him, why he'd been carrying it in cash, where he'd been going with it, she hoped it still had a chance to matter. She slept. Day two was like day one, but harder in the ways that the second day of something always is. The novelty of crisis wears off, and what's left is just the grinding, practical labor of existing without resources. She went back to the medical building and worked. She ate at the church again. She checked in at the library, and there was no message from Officer Reyes. Late in the afternoon, sitting outside the shelter, waiting for the beds to open, she heard something that made her go still. On engine, low steady with a particular resonance she hadn't heard before, or hadn't noticed before more accurately, because motorcycles weren't unusual on these streets. But this one slowed as it passed her, and she looked up, and the man on it was wearing a leather vest with patches, and he was looking at the street numbers, and he turned his head and saw her and kept moving. She thought nothing of it. 40 minutes later, he came back. He stopped the bike at the curb in front of the shelter and took off his helmet, and he was maybe 45, weathered with close-cropped hair and a scar along his jaw that had healed imperfectly. He looked at her with the direct assessing look of a person who has spent a lot of time making fast judgments about people. "You Lily Carter," he said. For the third time in 2 days, her own name arrived like a small electric shock. "Who's asking?" "Name's Danny," he said. "Danny Cruz. I ride with the Desert Pack out of Tucson. You know what that means?" "No," she said honestly. "It means I'm not here to cause you trouble," he said. "I'm here because Jack Mercer asked me to find you." She stared at him. He's alive. Something moved across Danny Cruz's face, relief, maybe of a specific kind, the kind that happens when the thing you were afraid of saying turned out to be something better than it looked. He's alive. He's not good, but he's alive, and when he came around last night, first thing he asked about was his money. He paused. Second thing he asked after they told him about the hospital and the intake record and the girl who brought it in, second thing he asked was who she was and where she was. Lily's chest did something complicated. "He doesn't know you," Danny said. "He doesn't know why you did what you did, but he asked me to find you and tell you." He stopped, looked down at the handlebars for a second, then back up. "He said to tell you he sees you. That's the message. He sees you, Bond." She didn't trust herself to speak for a moment. "How did you find me?" she said when she could. "Hospital gave us the name. We know this city some. I asked around." He said it simply, like finding a person without a phone or address was a matter of asking the right 3 questions in the right order, which she supposed it might be if you knew which questions and who to ask. "Is there something he needs?" she said. "The money, did it get to him?" "Money sorted. That's not—" Danny paused. "Lily, are you okay? Like, practically speaking, where are you staying?" She looked at him. He looked back. She thought about lying, the automatic protective instinct of someone who has learned that honesty about her situation is an invitation for condescension or pity or something worse. She thought about saying, "I'm fine, I've got a place," the way she'd learned to say it. She thought about the fact that this man had ridden from wherever he'd been to deliver a message from a man in an ICU, and his eyes were direct and his hands were still, and he hadn't looked at her yet like she was a problem to be managed. "I'm at the shelter on 6th, she said. "I got fired when I returned the money. The motel manager filed a false report with the police saying I stole from guests. I've been managing." Danny Cruz went very still. It was a specific kind of stillness. Not shock, not confusion, but the stillness of someone receiving information and processing it with great care. He said nothing for a moment. His jaw tightened slightly. "What's the manager's name?" he said. "Rick Danner." He took out a phone and typed something. Then he looked up. "I need you to tell me everything," what he said. "All of it, from the beginning." "Why?" "Because Jack Mercer is my brother's oldest friend," he said. "And because what you're describing, what Danner did, that's not something we walk away from." She looked at him. She looked at the patches on his vest. She thought about what it meant that a man who looked like Danny Cruz, who rode what he rode, who said we with that particular weight, was sitting at her curb asking her to tell him everything. She thought about Rick Danner's smile and the story he was already telling, and the cage he'd built around her while she was doing the right thing. She thought about Jack Mercer saying he sees you. She sat down on the shelter steps. It started 11 days ago, she said. I came into town on a bus from Albuquerque. I needed work, and the motel had a sign in the window. Danny Cruz sat on his bike and listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't look at his phone. He listened the way people listen when they've decided that what they're hearing matters. When she finished, the light had changed from afternoon to early evening, gold and low, and she told him everything from the application to the envelope, to Rick's face, to the walk to the hospital, to Officer Reyes in the cruiser, to the email she'd sent, in the shelter, and the $60 she'd earned that afternoon. Danny was quiet for a moment. Can I see the officer's card? He said. She pulled it out. He photographed it with his phone. Okay, he said. Okay, what? Okay, you're not dealing with this alone anymore. He said it simply without drama, the way you say a thing that has already been decided. I'm going to make some calls. Don't go anywhere tonight. I mean that stay at the shelter, stay visible, don't go anywhere without telling someone where you are. He looked at her. Can you do that? What's going to happen? I don't know exactly, he said, but Jack's going to know the full story, and what Jack knows, the club knows. I don't need anyone fighting my battles, she said, and she said it quickly before she could decide not to because she needed him to understand that she wasn't a stray to be taken in. I know you don't, Danny said. You proved that when you walked 4 miles in the desert to give back $22,000. He put his helmet back on. This isn't fighting your battle. This is people who believe in right and wrong showing up for someone who did right and got wrong for it. He paused, helmet in his hands, now looking at her over the top of it. There's a difference. She watched him start the bike. She watched the engine catch, felt the vibration of it, even at this distance, that low and particular resonance she now recognized. Tell Jack I'm glad he's alive, she said. Danny looked at her. I will, he said. He rode away. She sat on the shelter steps for a long time after the sound of his engine faded. The evening settled around her, and the street did its evening things, and she sat with the strange specific feeling of having been seen, not fixed, not rescued, just seen, acknowledged, by a dying man who'd sent his friend across the city to find her and deliver 4 words. He sees you. She thought about Rick Danner, wherever he was still running his version of the story. She thought about the cage he'd built and how certain he must be that it would hold because he'd been building cages for 14 years, and they always held because the people inside them never had anyone standing outside saying, I know what happened here and we're going to prove it. She thought about 150 miles of desert between here and Tucson, and she thought about engines, and she thought about what it sounded like when things were about to change. She didn't know yet, not specifically, not exactly, but she sat on those steps and she listened to the evening quiet, and underneath the quiet, she thought she could hear something. Not quite music, not quite thunder, just the distant suggestion of an engine. Getting closer. Danny Cruz was not a man who made promises lightly. She understood that about him before she even knew his full name. Something in the way he'd listened, the stillness of him, the way he took the officer's card number, with the quiet efficiency of someone who already knew what he was going to do with it. Some people listen to your story the way they listen to background noise, filing it away for later or letting it dissolve entirely. Danny had listened the way a person listens when they are building something out of what they hear. She thought about that as she lay on the shelter cot that second night. The bed was the same as the night before, narrow, firm smelling of industrial detergent, but something about the night felt different. Not safer exactly, not resolved, but different the way a room feels different when there is someone else in it, even before they speak, even before you turn around and see them. She slept better than she had any right to. Morning came and she went back to the medical building and worked her shift. She kept her head down and her hands moving and her mind present in the work because the work was what she had that was concrete and real in hers. $60 at the end, same as yesterday. She was building something dollar by dollar the way she always had. She was walking back toward the library at noon when her phone rang. Except she didn't have a phone. What she had was a borrowed 5 minutes on the shelter's desk phone that she'd arranged with the woman at the front, Dolores, who had a face like someone who had heard every story and still chose every morning to open the door. Dolores found her at the library walking 3 blocks out of her way to deliver the message in person, which told Lily something about Dolores before Dolores said a word. Someone called for you at the desk, Dolores said. Left a number. Said his name was Marcus Hale and you'd know who that was. Lily didn't know who that was. She called the number from the shelter desk at 3 in the afternoon, Dolores sitting at a careful distance with her crossword puzzle and absolutely not appearing to listen. The phone rang twice. You, Lily Carter. The voice was deep measured with a Southwest accent that rolled its vowels slightly. Not aggressive, assured. Yes, she said. Name's Marcus Hale. People call me Sundown. I ride with the Hells Angels out of Phoenix. A pause not uncomfortable, like he was giving her time to process. Danny Cruz told me your story last night, all of it. Her hand tightened on the phone. Okay. I've known Jack Mercer for 27 years, Marcus said. He is my brother in every way that matters. When I got to the hospital 2 days ago and he told me about the envelope and the girl who brought it back, I want you to know what Jack said. You want to know what he said? She didn't answer because she couldn't quite make her voice work. He said, and I'm quoting him exactly, these are Jack's words. He said, find that girl and make sure she's all right. Make sure she's all right before you do anything else. Marcus paused. Those were his words. Before he asked about the money, before he asked about anything else. Lily pressed her free hand flat against the shelter desk. Are you all right? Marcus asked. I'm managing, she said. That's not what I asked. She closed her eyes for 1 second. I'm fired. I'm at a shelter, and the man who tried to steal the money filed a police report calling me a thief. So I'm managing. She opened her eyes. But I'm okay. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Rick Danner, he said. Yes, we know about Rick Danner, he said. And there was something in those 4 words, not a threat, nothing so crude as that, but a weight, a significance like a door closing on a room where something has been decided. I'm going to need you to understand something, Lily. When I say we know about Rick Danner, I mean we have been asking questions since Danny called me last night, and what we are finding is that your situation is not the first time this man has done something like this. She hadn't expected that. She felt it land somewhere between her ribs. How many times? We don't have a full picture yet, but enough. He let that sit. I want to meet you in person. I want to hear your account directly. Not because I doubt Danny. Danny doesn't make things up, but because this is important enough to be worth doing right. When, she said. Tomorrow morning, he said. The diner on Central and McDowell, 8 o'clock. Can you do that? Yes. Is there anything you need before then, practically speaking? She thought about what Danny had asked her the same question and how she'd answered it. She thought about how much easier it was the second time to say the true thing instead of the managed thing. I'm okay for tonight, she said. I have work in the afternoon. Good, Marcus said. And he said it with affirmative, just genuine, like her having work was a real thing worth being glad about. 8 o'clock, Central and McDowell. I'll be the big one with the gray beard. He hung up. Dolores turned a page of her crossword and said without looking up, sounds like things might be moving. Sounds like it, Lily said. She walked into the diner at 7:58 the next morning because she had been raised to be early to things that mattered, and this mattered. The diner was the kind of place that has been in one spot for 30 years without apology. Vinyl booths, laminated menus, coffee that arrived without being requested. She had $4 in her pocket for breakfast, and she intended to eat every cent of it. Marcus Hale was already there. I was exactly what he'd said, big gray-bearded, filling a booth, the way a piece of furniture fills a room with the particular presence of a man who has occupied space on his own terms for so long that the space itself seems to have adjusted to him. He was wearing a leather vest and a flannel shirt and reading glasses that were somehow the most human thing about him, perched at the end of his nose over a folded newspaper. He looked up when she came in, took off the glasses, and stood. He was enormous standing. She was 5'4", and he was at least 6'3", and every inch of him was real. Lily, he said. He put out his hand. She shook it. His hand swallowed hers completely. Sit down, he said. Coffee, please. The coffee arrived the way it does in diners like this, without ceremony, without options, just coffee, black hot, real. She wrapped her hands around the mug and looked at Marcus Hale across the table and waited. I want to start by telling you something, what he said, and I need you to hear it not as a thing somebody is saying to make you feel better, but as a statement of fact. He looked at her directly, the reading glasses folded on the table between them. What you did returning that money under those circumstances with what it cost you, I have been around a long time and I have known a lot of people, And what you did is not common. I want you to know that I know that. She looked at her coffee. Anyone could have done it. No, he said, simply, without argument but absolutely firm. They couldn't. Most people didn't. You did. He waited until she looked up. Okay, now let's talk about what we're going to do. He told her what they'd found. He told it the way a man tells things when he's done his homework, not rushing, not editorializing, just the information in order. In the 14 years Rick Danner had been managing the Desert Sun Motel, there had been 3 separate complaints filed against him with the county, all from people with limited resources, limited credibility in the official sense. A day laborer from Tucson who said Rick had withheld wages and then claimed he'd stolen from the till. A woman from New Mexico in similar circumstances to Lily's, who'd been fired and reported for theft after a dispute over pay, and a man from California who'd stayed at the motel and reported that items were missing from his room, items that Rick had filed an insurance claim on and collected. 3 complaints, 3 separate jurisdictions barely connected in any database, 3 people without resources to pursue anything further, 3 cases that went nowhere because that's what cases do when nobody with resources is pushing them forward. He found a system, Marcus said. Hire people who can't fight back. Squeeze them. If they comply, fine, he profits. If they don't, he paused, he discredits them before they can discredit him. Files reports, tells stories, moves on. 14 years of it. Lily listened. She felt something building in her chest, not quite anger, because anger was too hot, too immediate. This was colder. The specific cold of understanding that what happened to you wasn't personal in the way you thought it was. That you were a slot in a system somebody had built and refined over years. He didn't just try to steal Jack's money, she said. No, Marcus said. He was going to steal it either way. If you'd given it to him stolen, if you hadn't, he was going to report the room with the money missing and claim it during the confusion of the ambulance call, probably. You interrupted his plan by finding it first and making a choice he didn't predict. He didn't think I'd return it, she said. Nobody would have predicted that, Marcus said. Not unkindly, just true. She put her coffee cup down. What happens now? Now, Marcus said, we take what we have to Officer Reyes and we take it to his supervisor, and we do this correctly through the proper channels with documentation because that is the only way anything sticks. We are not vigilantes. He said the last sentence with the particular emphasis of someone who has said it before and means it genuinely. I need you to understand that. We find truth, we expose it, we let the law do its job. And if the law doesn't do its job, he looked at her steadily, then we find a better law, he said. There are lawyers who take cases like this. There are journalists who cover stories like this. There are multiple channels, and we use all of them. A pause. But we start with the right channel. She nodded. I need your full account in writing, he said. Everything. Dates, conversations, exact words where you remember them. Can you do that? I already emailed it to Reyes, she said. I can write it out in more detail. Something moved across Marcus Hale's face that might have been surprise. You emailed it to the officer. Day before yesterday, from the library. He looked at her for a moment. You've been working this the whole time, he said. I didn't have any other option. He was quiet for a second. Then Jack's going to want to know that. He's going to want to know that specifically. She picked up her coffee again. How was he? Marcus took a breath, and for the first time, she saw something underneath the steadiness, not quite grief, but proximity to it, the face of a person holding something heavy with practiced care. He's not good, he said. The cardiac event was the second one this year. His heart he stopped. The doctors are managing it. He's conscious, he's talking, he's giving everybody grief. A small, real smile crossed his face, which is a good sign. The money, she said. What was it for? You don't have to tell me. I kept wondering. Marcus looked at his coffee. Jack has a daughter, he said. Melissa, she's 28. They had a falling out years ago before I knew Jack well, but bad enough that she stopped speaking to him. Changed cities changed her number. He was quiet for a moment. He found her address 6 weeks ago. He'd been saving that money for the better part of a year. He was driving to Albuquerque to leave it on her doorstep with a letter. He paused. Not to buy her forgiveness. He's very clear about that. Just to give her something real, something she could use. because he doesn't know how much time he has and he wanted her to have it. The diner kept doing its diner things around them. The coffee kept being hot. Lily sat with what Marcus had just said and felt it settle into her chest alongside everything else. And she thought about how a person could carry $22,000 across the desert for someone they'd hurt, someone who might never know, might never open the door, might send the envelope back unopened, and how that was love in its most stripped-down form without any guarantee of return. Did he reach her? Lily said. Not yet, Marcus said. He's trying, from his hospital bed. He looked at Lily. He's trying. She nodded. She didn't trust herself to say anything more about that particular thing right then. They spent another hour at that diner table. Marcus took notes. He asked careful questions, and she answered them carefully, and he wrote things down in a way that felt organized, purposeful, like it was going somewhere real. By the time they finished, she had 2 more cups of coffee in her and something she hadn't had in days, a concrete sense that something was actually happening. She was outside on the sidewalk adjusting her backpack when Marcus said, "One more thing." She turned. "Jack asked specifically if you would come to the hospital," he said. "When you're ready." Not an obligation, he made me say that, not an obligation. But he'd like to meet you. She thought about a man in an ICU fighting his own heart, trying to reach a daughter who might not answer, carrying $22,000 and a letter and whatever regrets fit inside 14 years of silence. "Tell him I'll come today," she said, "after my shift." Marcus nodded. He pulled out his wallet. She shook her head before he could speak. "Don't," she said. "Lily, I have work," she said. "I have $60 coming this afternoon. I'm okay." He put the wallet away, but he handed her a card, his number and someone else's number written on the back in his handwriting. The second number is a legal contact. If Reyes or anyone else approaches you again about Danner's allegations, you call that number before you say anything. She took the card. She put it next to Reyes's card in her jacket pocket, the 2 cards side by side, and she thought for a moment about how different they felt, how one had come from a situation and the other had come from people choosing to show up. She worked her shift. She walked to the hospital. She told the woman at the front desk her name and who she was there to see. And this time there was no pause, no careful neutrality. The woman picked up a phone and spoke into it and said, "She's here." And that was all. And a few minutes later, a nurse came to walk her back. The ICU was quiet, the way hospitals are quiet, not peaceful, but held like noise is being actively managed. The nurse stopped outside a room and said, "He gets tired quickly. Don't worry if he falls asleep. It doesn't mean you should leave. It just means his body is working hard. He knows you're coming and he's been keeping himself awake for 2 hours, which his doctor told him not to do, which means he's been awake for 2 hours." Lily almost smiled. "Is he stubborn?" "Famously," the nurse said. And she did smile, the brief, warm smile of someone who has spent enough time with a person to find them genuinely funny. She went in. Jack Mercer was large, even in a hospital bed, which is a hard thing to be. Hospital beds have a way of making everyone look reduced, diminished, borrowed from their real selves. But Jack occupied the bed the way he probably occupied every space he'd ever been in, with a kind of dense physical reality that didn't shrink for context. He was pale and there were more wires and monitors attached to him than she'd expected, and his eyes were closed when she came in. They opened when she was 3 steps into the room. They were gray. She hadn't expected gray. Dark gray, the color of sky before rain, and they moved to her face and stayed there with an attention that was immediate and total. "You're Lily," he said. His voice was rougher than she'd imagined from Marcus's description, lower like something that had been worn smooth by years of outdoor use. "Yes," she said. "You're 19 years old," he said. "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. "You walked 4 miles in the desert to give back money that nobody would have known you took." "Yes." Why, she'd have been asked this question now by several people in several ways, and she'd answered it each time with the most honest version of herself she could manage. But standing in Jack Mercer's hospital room with all those wires in the monitors and his gray eyes on her face, the usual answers felt insufficient. Not wrong, but like approximations of the real thing. "Because it was yours," she said, "and because I needed to know what I would do." I was quiet for a moment. "And what did you learn?" She thought about it genuinely the way the question deserved. "That I'm still the person I thought I was," she said, "even when it costs something." Jack Mercer closed his eyes for a second and opened them again. and she saw something move across his face that she couldn't name precisely. Relief maybe, or the specific emotion you feel when something confirms what you needed it to confirm. "I've got a daughter," he said, "Melissa. She's 28. "I know," Lily said. "Marcus told me." "We didn't talk for 8 years," he said. 8 years. I did things I'm not proud of, and she walked away, and she had every right to." He took a breath that required visible effort. The money was for her, not to buy anything. Just to say, "I know I failed you and I'm sorry, and here is something real. Something you can use because I don't know how to fix what I broke, but I can do this much." "She's going to know you tried to get it to her," Lily said. "That matters." "Does it?" "It would to me," she said. He looked at her. "Do you have family?" he said. She thought about Carol, 3 years and then gone. She thought about her grandmother in a series of homes that weren't, in a world that had been consistently better at taking things from her than giving them. "Not really," she said. "Not anymore." Jack was quiet. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Outside the room, the ICU continued its careful work. "Marcus tells me what that motel manager did to you," Jack said. "We're handling it," she said. "You shouldn't have to handle it," he said. "You should never have been in that position. You did everything right and you got—" He stopped, pressed his lips together. "It makes me angry," he said plainly. "I want you to know it makes me angry." "You're in an ICU," she said. "You're not supposed to be angry." "I'm not supposed to do a lot of things," he said. "I do them anyway." She looked at him. "That's probably how you ended up in here." Something shifted on his face, and for a moment, brief and real, she saw it, a man who had laughed for 50-some years, a man for whom humor was native and present, even in hospital beds with wires attached. It was just the edge of a smile gone, almost before it arrived, but she caught it. "Yeah," he said, "probably." She stayed for 40 minutes. He fell asleep twice briefly, the way the nurse had said he would mid-sentence once, which startled her until she understood that this was his body, making unilateral decisions about what it needed. She sat in the chair beside the bed and waited, and he woke up again, and they talked about small things, which felt enormous given the context. She told him about Albuquerque, where he'd been heading with the money, and he told her it was a city he'd driven through 20 years ago, and remembered for the light, the way the afternoon light hit differently there than anywhere else he'd been. She told him she'd come into the city she was in now on a bus from Albuquerque, that she'd looked out the window when they crossed the state line, and thought just for a second that the light looked different here too, harder and cleaner. He asked if she'd ever been on a motorcycle. She said no. He said, "When I get out of here, I'm going to fix that." She looked at him, at the monitors, at the wires, at the pallor of him, and the effort each sentence cost him, and she said, "Okay." And she meant it, the way you mean a thing you genuinely want to happen, not the way you mean a thing you say to make someone feel better. When she left, she stopped at the door and turned back. "Jack," she said. He looked at her. "I'm glad you didn't die in that parking lot," she said. He held her gaze. "So am I," he said. "More than I would have been 3 weeks ago." And she didn't ask what he meant by that, because she understood the way you understand things that happen at the edge of what someone is willing to say. She walked back out through the hospital. The next 2 days moved fast. Marcus called twice with updates on the investigation. The word Reyes's supervisor had been made aware of the additional complaints, that a connection was being drawn between the cases, that someone from the county was asking questions at the motel. Danny Cruz appeared at the shelter on the second afternoon with a phone prepaid loaded with $30 of minutes, and handed it to her so matter-of-factly that she'd taken it before she'd processed what was happening. "You need to be reachable," he said. "And Danny, it's $30, he said. "Don't argue with me about $30. She didn't argue. She worked her shifts. She checked in with Marcus. She visited Jack every afternoon, and each afternoon he was slightly more present, slightly more himself, the edges of him coming back, the humor sharpening the gray eyes less clouded. The doctor told her on the third afternoon in the hall outside his room that the intervention had been faster than expected, and the prognosis was better than it had been at intake. She said thank you, which was inadequate, but was all she had. On the third afternoon of her visits, she walked into Jack's room and found someone else there. A woman, late 20s, dark-haired, standing at the side of the bed with her back to the door and her shoulders carrying the specific tension of someone who has been waiting a long time to do a very hard thing. She turned when Lily came in, and her face was wet, and she had Jack's gray eyes exactly. Lily stopped. "Sorry," she said. "I can come back." "No," Jack said from the bed. His voice was different, fuller, rougher, like it was working with more than it had the day before. Stay. Lily, this is Melissa. Melissa looked at Lily. Her face was doing three or four things at once, grief and relief and something raw and new. The face of someone who has crossed a large distance and is still processing the arrival. You're the girl who brought back the money, Melissa said. Yes, Lily said. Melissa looked at her father, then back at Lily. He told me he said you walked 4 miles in the desert heat to return it, that you lost your job for it. She shook her head slightly like she was still fitting the pieces together. Why would you do that? Lily looked at Jack. Jack looked back at her. Because he was trying to do something important, Lily said, and I didn't think that should get lost. Melissa's eyes filled again. She pressed her hand over her mouth and breathed through it, the controlled, deliberate breath of someone managing themselves with effort. And then she said very quietly, he told me about the letter. He read it to me. The room was very still. Was it? Lily started and stopped because the question was too personal and not hers to ask. But Melissa answered it anyway. It was the most honest thing he's ever said to me, she said, in my whole life. She looked at her father. I'm working on it, she said to him. That's all I can say right now. I'm working on it. That's everything, Jack said. Lily took a step backward toward the door. I'll give you some time. Lily, Jack said. She stopped. Come back tomorrow, he said. I need to tell you something. All right, come back tomorrow. She looked at him. Something in his face settled, certain the face of a man who has made a decision and is done with the process of making it. I'll be here, she said. She walked out of the hospital and into the late afternoon, and the air hit her like it always did. The dry heat, the specific smell of a desert city in the early evening, exhaust and dust, and the faint mineral smell of the air itself. She stopped on the sidewalk and stood there for a moment, breathing it in. She didn't know what Jack wanted to tell her. She didn't know what tomorrow would look like. What she knew 3 days ago, she'd had nothing and nowhere, and a false report filed against her name. Today she had a phone in her pocket, and a legal contact, and a police officer whose supervisor was asking questions at the Desert Sun Motel, and a man in the ICU who had asked her to come back tomorrow. She knew one more thing. She felt it before she heard it, a vibration in the ground, faint and low, like the earth was remembering something. She stood on the sidewalk and felt it come up through the soles of her worn-out shoes, and she looked up and she looked west, and the sun was going down red over the desert, and somewhere in that direction she could feel it. Not hear it, feel it, like the beginning of something that had no intention of being quiet. She stood there until the feeling faded. Then she started walking. Behind her, she didn't see the first rider turn the corner 2 blocks back, and then the second behind him, and then headlights, one pair after another, an unbroken chain of them stretching back further than the eye could follow at dusk. She was still walking when the sound finally caught up to her. Low, steady, growing, like thunder from a sky with no clouds, like something enormous deciding that now was the time. She heard them before she saw them. The sound arrived the way weather arrives, not as a single moment, but as a building cumulative thing. A pressure change before the rain, a shift in the quality of the air itself. She was half a block from the shelter when the first vibration came up through her feet, and she stopped walking, without consciously deciding to stop, the way your body sometimes understands something your mind is still processing. Then she heard it properly. Not one engine, not 10, something she didn't have a number for yet, a sound that started as a rumble at the edge of hearing and grew into something that occupied the whole chest cavity, that you felt in your back teeth and the base of your sternum, that made the air itself seem to thicken with a kind of low total frequency that had no comparison in her experience. She turned around. The street behind her was filled with headlights. Not car headlights, the paired, symmetric light of motorcycles, 2 narrow beams each, and there were so many of them, stretching back into the evening dark that she lost count before she reached 20. They moved in formation, slow and deliberate, filling the full width of the street, and the sound of them together was unlike anything she had ever heard. Not noise exactly, but presence, mass, the physical expression of numbers too large to dismiss. She stood on the sidewalk and watched them come. People came out of buildings. A man from the convenience store on the corner stepped outside with a drink in his hand and stopped mid-sip. 2 teenagers on the opposite side went completely still. A woman walking a dog gathered the leash close and just watched. The kind of involuntary attention that happens when the world presents something that the ordinary human response system hasn't categorized before. Lily stood among them, and she was the only one who understood what this was, or thought she did, because even she hadn't expected this. Danny Cruz on a single motorcycle, yes. Marcus Hale and a handful of men, yes, that she could have anticipated. But this was not a handful of men. This was not a contingent or a delegation. This was all of them. The lead bike slowed as it reached her block, and she recognized Marcus Hale even before he pulled his helmet off the sides of him. The gray beard, the unhurried way he occupied the motorcycle like a man who has long since made peace with gravity. He stopped. The bikes behind him stopped. One after another, the engines cut, and the silence that followed was almost louder than the sound had been, a hell breath in absence with weight. Marcus got off the bike and walked toward her. "You ready?" he said. She looked at him, at the rows of riders behind him, at the leather and chrome and the faces, men and women both. She saw now different ages, different builds, but with something shared in their expressions that she didn't have a word for yet. "Ready for what?" she said. "The motel," he said. "We're going to the motel." Her stomach tightened. "Marcus, you said proper channels. You said, we are using proper channels," he said. "Officer Reyes is meeting us there. His supervisor is meeting us there. A woman from the county attorney's office who took a very interested phone call this morning is meeting us there." He paused. "We are not going to do anything. We are going to be present while the proper channels do what they're supposed to do. But Rick Danner has been counting on people not having backup when they show up. We're changing that condition." She looked at him. 153 riders, he said, came from 4 states. Some of them drove through the night. Because what happened to you happened on the property of a man who was in the process of stealing from one of our brothers. And what happens to people who help our brothers, that matters to us. It matters to everyone here. He held her gaze. "But also, and I need you to hear this separately, what happened to you matters. Not just because of Jack, because of what you did and what it cost you, and because Rick Danner has been doing this for 14 years, and not one person has had enough backup to stop him." She stood there with the evening air on her face and the rows of bikes behind Marcus, and the whole impossible, specific reality of this moment pressing in on her from every direction, and she did something she hadn't done in a very long time. She felt like she might cry. Not the sad kind. The other kind, the kind you feel when something is so much more than you expected that your body doesn't have a category for it and defaults to tears as the nearest available response. She breathed through it, 4 seconds in, 4 out. The thing about crying in public was that once you started, it was hard to stop, and she needed to be able to speak. "I'm not dressed for this," she said, which was the most useless thing she could have said, and she knew it the moment it left her mouth. Marcus Hale looked at her for a beat, and then something happened on his face that she hadn't seen there before. He laughed, not politely, not briefly, a real laugh, a large man's laugh that came from somewhere genuine and surprised him as much as it surprised her. "You're perfect," he said, "exactly as you are. Get on." "I don't have a—" "Danny," Marcus said without raising his voice. Danny Cruz appeared from 3 bikes back as if he'd been waiting for exactly this moment, which he probably had. He had a spare helmet under his arm. He held it out to her. She looked at it. She looked at Danny. She looked at Marcus. "Lily," Marcus said, and his voice was different now. Quieter. The laugh gone something more serious underneath. "You have been handling this alone since the minute you found that envelope. You don't have to do that anymore tonight. Let us stand beside you. That's all this is." She took the helmet. She got on the back of Danny's bike, and when the engine started again, all of them, one after another, in a chain reaction of sound and vibration that she felt in every bone. She gripped the passenger handles, and she breathed, and she let the sound of it take up all the available space in her chest where the fear had been. They rode. She had never been on a motorcycle. She had told Jack that 3 days ago, and he had said he was going to fix it. She thought about that as they moved the way the bike leaned into, turns the way the wind hit differently than car wind, more direct, more honest, the full fact of motion with nothing between you and it. She understood for the first time why people did this. Why someone might spend a lifetime on the back of a machine that offered nothing between your body and the world except speed and balance and the choice to keep going. The Desert Sun Motel took 11 minutes to reach. She knew the moment they arrived because she could see the lights from 2 blocks out, police vehicles, their blue and red making the night pulse in a familiar pattern. 2 units she counted, and then another, and a vehicle she didn't recognize that turned out to be a county attorney's car, And beyond all of that, the motel itself, the sign with its permanently burnt-out letter, the parking lot with its specific geometry she'd memorized over 11 days of walking it. The bike stopped, engines off. 153 people, give or take, stood in the dark in a motel parking lot off Route 10, and the silence after the engines died was total and absolute and very, very heavy. Rick Danner came out of the lobby. She saw him from the back of Danny's bike, and she watched his face do what faces do when reality arrives in a form that doesn't match the scenario they had prepared for. He'd been expecting maybe a conversation, a difficult one, perhaps. The county attorney was a complication. The police presence was concerning, but he'd talked his way through complications before. 14 years of complications, all managed. He had not been expecting this. She watched his smile appear and then stall. Not drop, stall, which was different, which was the smile trying to do the job it always did, and finding that the situation had exceeded its capacity. His eyes moved over the assembled riders, counting, recalculating, and she could see from 40 feet away the specific moment when the math stopped working for him. Officer Reyes was there, and with him a woman in her 40s whom Lily didn't recognize but whose bearing said plainly that she was the person in this parking lot with the authority to make decisions. She introduced herself to Rick Danner in a voice Lily couldn't hear from this distance, and she handed him something, a document from the look of it, and Rick's hand took it reflexively, the way hands take things before the brain is caught up. Marcus walked forward. Just Marcus alone, which took a particular kind of confidence to walk toward a situation that complex, with that kind of unhurried deliberateness, like confidence had nothing to prove. Lily got off the bike. Danny turned. "You don't have to go up there," he said. "Yes, I do," she said. She walked up. She stood slightly behind Marcus's left shoulder, which felt right present, but not leading her story, but his weight behind it, and she needed both of those things to be true simultaneously. Rick Danner saw her the moment she arrived. His eyes went to her face and stayed there, and for a single stripped-down second, the smile was entirely gone, and she saw what was underneath it. Not menace, not cunning, something smaller than that and more ordinary, a man who had been comfortable for a very long time, finding out that comfort was a condition, not a permanent state. Mr. Danner. The woman, she was Assistant County Attorney Patricia Whelan. Lily learned later, said, "I'd like to walk through some specifics with you regarding the complaint filed against Ms. Carter, as well as some additional information that's come to our attention regarding prior incidents at this property." "I don't know what you think you have," Rick said. His voice was steady. She gave him that his voice was steady. "But I've been running a clean operation here for 14 years, and any suggestion otherwise—" "Mr. Danner." Whelan's voice was not loud, but it was the voice of someone who is accustomed to being the last person to speak on a subject. "I have 3 prior complaints, documentation from a medical facility confirming Ms. Carter's account of her actions. Security footage from a gas station that places her in the direction of the hospital on the morning in question." Rick's head turned, fast. He looked at Whelan and then at Lily. "Security footage. From the gas station at the corner of 5th and Harrow." Whelan said, "Where a camera covers the sidewalk. You can see Miss Carter walking east toward the hospital at 9:42 in the morning, which is consistent with her account and inconsistent with your claim that she left the property with the intention of absconding with the money." A pause. "The hospital's intake timestamp is 10:17. The distance between those 2 points on foot is approximately 4 miles, Lily said quietly. She hadn't meant to speak, but there it was. Whelan looked at her. A very brief, very contained expression of something that might have been respect. "Approximately 4 miles, she confirmed. Rick Danner looked at the document in his hand. He looked at Whelan. He looked at Reyes. He looked at the rows of riders in his parking lot, still and watchful. He looked at Marcus Hale, who had said nothing, who was simply standing there with his arms at his sides and his gray beard and his absolute immovable presence. And then Rick Danner looked at Lily. She held his gaze. She thought about 11 days of cleaning rooms. She thought about the smile that meant nothing. She thought about standing in room 14 with $22,000 in her hands and his voice saying, "Take the money, nobody's going to know." She thought about 4 miles in 90-degree heat and $87 in the shelter cot, in the library computer, in the email she'd sent to Reyes, in the moment Danny Cruz had appeared at the curb saying, "Jack Mercer asked me to find you." She held his gaze and she didn't blink. Rick looked away first. He said something to Whelan in a lower voice. She didn't catch all of it, but she caught the shape of it, the posture shift, the way the body changes when it's decided to stop fighting a particular battle, Whelan responded. Reyes moved to stand beside Whelan. There was paperwork. There were words like cooperation, in prior complaints, informal investigation, involuntary compliance, which Lily understood were the vocabulary of a process that would take longer than tonight but had started definitively here. She stepped back. Marcus stepped back with her. It's moving, he said quietly. Is it enough? She said. It started, he said. That's what tonight needed to be. He looked at her. The rest takes time, but it starts from here. She nodded. She looked at the motel, at the sign at the specific rectangle of room 14's window, 2 stories up the room where she'd found an envelope and stood at the hardest door she'd ever stood at and learned something about herself she hadn't known for certain before. She thought she should feel more. Triumph maybe, or relief, or some clean and satisfying sense of resolution. But what she actually felt was quieter than that something that lived just below the sternum. A low warmth, the particular feeling of a thing that is exactly what it needs to be without being more or less. Can I ask you something? She said to Marcus. Always. Why did all of them come? She gestured one small motion toward the rows of riders behind them. Not you and Danny, all of them. Why does this matter to that many people? Marcus was quiet for a moment, not thinking she'd learned the difference in the time she'd known him between his thinking silences and his choosing silences. This was choosing. When Jack Mercer was 22 years old, he said, he was in a bad situation, worse than yours, and I say that knowing what yours has been. He was alone and he had nothing and he was headed somewhere he couldn't come back from. And a man he didn't know, a rider he'd seen twice at a rest stop and exchanged maybe 30 words with, that man stopped. Just stopped, pulled over, got off his bike and said, I see you. You don't have to handle this alone. She listened. Jack's been riding for 30 years, Marcus said, and he has stopped for more strangers than I can count. That's what he does. That's who he is. That man who stopped for him 30 years ago, Jack never even got his name, but he never forgot what it felt like. He looked at the rows of riders. When those people learned what happened to you, learned that Jack Mercer had been trying to do something good, and a 19-year-old girl had protected that good thing at cost to herself, they didn't need to be asked twice. She was quiet. We take care of people who take care of people, Marcus said. That's it. That's the whole thing. Officer Reyes appeared at her elbow. She turned. Miss Carter, he said, I want to apologize. She looked at him. I should have been more skeptical of Danner's account from the beginning, he said. The hospital record was consistent with your story. I should have weighted that more heavily than I did. He said it plainly, without excessive self-flagellation, but also without deflection. I'm sorry. She thought about sitting in the back of his cruiser, telling him what had happened, watching him write things down. She thought about how it had felt to be the person without documentation in a situation that ran on documentation. You came tonight, she said, that matters. He nodded once, accepting that for what it was rather than as absolution. The investigation of Danner is going to take some time, he said, but the allegations against you, the theft report, I'm recommending it be formally dismissed. I expect that to happen within a few days. She breathed, just breathed. Thank you, she said. Reyes moved back to where Whelan was working through her paperwork with the patient efficiency of someone who knows this is going to be a long night. Lily watched them. She watched Danner, who was answering questions now, in the specific tone of a man who has concluded that resistance is more expensive than compliance. She watched the motel, the sign, the rooms, the parking lot where Jack Mercer had collapsed on a Thursday morning, and set something in motion that neither of them had understood at the time. Danny materialized beside her. You good? I'm good, she said. Hungry? She laughed, actually laughed short, and surprised, the kind that comes out before you've decided to laugh. Why does everyone keep asking me that? Because you're always not eating when someone isn't asking, he said. Come on, there's a place down the street and Marcus is buying, and before you argue with me about that, don't. She didn't argue. They ate at a diner different from the one where she'd met Marcus, smaller, louder, completely unprepared for the number of people who attempted to fill it. So they took up the diner and the parking lot and the sidewalk outside and the diner owner. A stout woman named Rosa came out twice to look at the assembled crowd and went back inside and made more coffee, both times, which told you everything you needed to know about Rosa. Lily ate a real meal, eggs and toast and bacon and coffee. That was better than most coffee she'd had, and she ate all of it and nobody commented on how thoroughly she ate it, which was a kindness, she noted. She ended up at a table with Danny and two women riders she hadn't met yet. Karen, who was 51 and had been riding for 20 years, and had the particular energy of a person who thinks quickly and doesn't waste words, and Bet, who was 63 and white-haired and looked like someone's grandmother, right up until she opened her mouth and said something that made the whole table laugh in a way that required recovery time. They talked. Not about the investigation, not about the motel, just talk the way people talk when the work is done and the evening is long and the food is good. Karen asked about Albuquerque and Lily told her about the bus and the light, and Karen said she'd ridden through Albuquerque in 2019 and the light was exactly right. She knew exactly what Lily meant. Bet told a story about a motorcycle trip in 1987 that got more implausible with each sentence, and everyone at the table seemed to understand this was the point. Lily sat in the middle of all of it and felt something she didn't immediately have a name for. Not happiness exactly, or not only that. Something more structural, like a wall that had been taking weight for a long time, had just found a matching wall across from it, and the two of them together could hold up something neither could alone. It was 11:30 when Marcus found her at the table and said, "There's something else. Tonight, before it gets later." She looked at him. "Jack called me an hour ago," Marcus said. "From the hospital. He's supposed to be resting." "I know, he knows. He called anyway." Marcus sat down across from her. "He asked me to tell you something that he said he needs you to know tonight, not tomorrow." She waited. "He found Melissa 3 months ago," Marcus said. "Tracked her down through people the way you find people when they don't want to be found. And you respect that enough not to go to the door, but you find the address anyway just to have it. Just to know she was real and present and in the world." He paused. He'd been saving the money for 6 months. Cash because he doesn't trust banks, never has, and because there was something he said this to me, and I'm quoting him, something about carrying it physically, like if he was holding it, it was real. And if it was real, he had to go. She listened. "He was driving to Albuquerque," Marcus said. "He'd been putting it off for 6 months. Every weekend, he had a reason not to go. Too much going on, not the right time. Jack's good at reasons." He looked at her. That Thursday, the day he stopped at the Desert Sun, he had been on the road for 3 hours. He'd told himself no more reasons. You go today or you never go. He paused. His heart chose that morning to make a decision of its own. "I know this part," she said gently. "You don't know this part," Marcus said. When he woke up in the ICU, first thing he felt was that the envelope was gone. He knew it was gone because he kept it under the mattress and he knew how he'd left that room. And he thought, Marcus stopped. He said he thought I waited too long. I finally went and I waited too long and now it's gone and I'm going to die in this city and she's never going to get it. Lily's hand tightened around her coffee cup. Then Janet told him a girl had come in, had walked in with an envelope, had given her name. Marcus looked at her. He said that was the moment he decided he wasn't going to die. Not that day. He paused. He said if the world was still making people like you in it, he had things left to do. The diner kept going around her. Rose's coffee kept coming. Bet was telling another story at the other end of the table that was getting impressively implausible. The night pressed against the windows, and inside it was warm and loud and full of people. Lily sat with what Marcus had just said, and she let it be as large as it actually was. "Melissa came to see him today," Lily said. "I was there." "I know, he told me." Marcus watched her. "He also told me what you said to her, that he was trying to do something important and you didn't think it should get lost." He held her gaze. She told him that's what made her get in the car. Not the money, not the letter, the fact that a stranger had decided his trying was worth protecting. Something broke open in Lily's chest, not painfully the other way, like a window like air. "He has something he wants to give you," Marcus said. "Tomorrow, when you go." He held up a hand before she could speak. "Not money, it's not money." He was very specific about that. He said, and again, exact words he said, "Tell her it's not charity and it's not payment, and if she argues with me about it, I'm going to be very disappointed, and I don't have the cardiac capacity for disappointment right now." She looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at her with an expression that said he agreed with every word of that. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She went back to the shelter that night, on the back of Danny's bike, and the city moved around her in the dark, and she felt the engine's vibration in her chest like a second heartbeat. Danny dropped her at the shelter door, and she got off and handed him the helmet, and he took it and looked at her. You know, he said, Jack's going to keep asking Marcus how you're doing until it gets inconvenient for everyone. I'm okay, she said. I know you are, he said. That's not what I mean. He looked at her steadily. I mean, we're not disappearing after tonight. I want you to know that. Whatever the next thing looks like for you, you're not handling it alone. Okay. She thought about saying she didn't need anything. She thought about saying she was fine. She was managing. She had $60 a day and a shelter bed and a prepaid phone and a legal contact and more than she'd had 2 weeks ago. She thought about the fact that all of that was true and still didn't answer what Danny was actually saying. Okay, she said. He nodded. He put the helmet under his arm. He started the bike and she watched him go, and the sound of the engine faded into the night. And the shelter door was behind her with its institutional smell and its narrow beds and its specific particular dignity of being a place that existed for people who needed it. She went inside. Dolores was at the desk, crossword down, for once looking at Lily over the rims of the readers she wore for seeing distances she pretended not to need them for. Big night, Dolores said. Big night, Lily said. You eat. I ate. Good. Dolores picked up the crossword. 7-letter word for unexpected windfall. Lily thought about it. Godsend, she said. Dolores counted the letters on her fingers. Huh, she said. That's it. Lily went to her cot. She lay on her back in the dark and with her hands flat on her stomach, feeling her own breathing, the rise and fall of it, the simple and reliable fact of it. She thought about tomorrow. She thought about what Jack wanted to give her. Not money, he'd been specific about that, which meant it was something else, and she couldn't figure out what, and she found that she was not anxious about it the way she might have been a week ago. She found that she was something closer to curious. She thought about Melissa in that hospital room with her wet face and her gray eyes that were exactly her father's gray eyes saying, I'm working on it. She thought about what it cost to say that. She thought about the specific courage of walking into a room with someone you love and haven't spoken to in 8 years and saying, I'm not there yet, but I'm trying. She thought that might be the bravest thing she'd heard all week, which was saying something given the week. She thought about Carol saying, that's the version of you that you have to live with. She thought I like this version. She thought I'm going to sleep now, and she did. The morning came, and with it something she hadn't anticipated. Her phone rang. The prepaid Danny had given her, which had not yet rung for anything. She answered it, fast heart, already moving. Lily Carter, a woman's voice. Brisk, professional. This is Janet Flores at Desert Valley Medical. Yes, Lily said, sitting up. Is Jack? Mr. Mercer is stable, Janet said quickly. That's not why I'm calling. A pause. I'm calling because there was a development overnight that I was asked to inform you about directly. Another pause, shorter, the pause of someone choosing words carefully. The county attorney's office has formally opened an investigation into Richard Danner and the Desert Sun Motel with 3 counts of fraudulent complaint and 2 counts of wage theft listed in the initial filing. She paused. And the report filed against you has been officially withdrawn as of 40 minutes ago. Lily sat on the edge of the cot with the phone against her ear. Ms. Carter, Janet said. I'm here, Lily said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. I also want to say something personally, Janet said. Off the record, if that's a concept that applies here. A brief dry pause. What you did when you came in here 10 days ago. I've been in patient services for 16 years. I have seen people do extraordinary things, and I have seen people do things that made me lose sleep. What you did, I thought about it for days. A pause. I wanted you to know that. Lily looked at the shelter wall in front of her. Plain white, institutional, real. Thank you, she said, for documenting it, for believing it. Thank you for giving me something worth believing, Janet said. The call ended. Lily sat on the cot for 1 full minute and did not move. Then she stood up, tied her shoes, shouldered her backpack, and went to the hospital. She walked the whole way, not because she didn't have options. She could have called Danny. She could have taken the bus with the $3.40 she had in her pocket. She walked because she wanted the time. She wanted the morning air and the city doing its morning things in the specific experience of her own feet carrying her to the place she was going, the same way they had carried her 10 days ago. Except that this morning was nothing like that morning. This morning she was not carrying $22,000 in someone else's money. This morning she was carrying something lighter and harder to name and entirely her own. She got to the hospital at 8:40. She walked through the automatic doors and the cool air hit her, and she went directly to the ICU without stopping at the desk because they knew her now, which was a sentence she had not expected to be able to say about a hospital. But here it was. She went into Jack's room. I was awake, more awake than she'd seen him, more present, less held together with visible effort, though the monitors were still there and the wires still there, and he was still unmistakably a man whose body had recently staged a significant revolt. You walked, he said before she'd said a word. How do you know that? You've got that look, he said, the one you get when you have been thinking for 45 minutes. She sat down in the chair beside the bed. The charges against me were dropped, she said. I know, Marcus called me. He looked at her. How does it feel? She thought about it. Like something stopped, she said, like a sound that's been in the background that you didn't know was there until it's gone. He nodded like that was exactly right. I've got something for you, he said. He reached toward the nightstand slowly, carefully, his body reminding him of its current terms, and picked up an envelope. Not the brown one, not this time. A white one, letter-sized. He held it out. She took it. Open it, he said. She opened it. Inside was a card, the kind that comes with flowers, the kind people write on when they don't have enough space for everything they want to say. On it, in handwriting that was large and slightly unsteady, Jack had written, "For the girl who decided my trying was worth protecting. I'm trying still. So should you." And underneath the card folded once a key, a physical metal key with a tag attached that had an address on it. She looked up. That address belongs to a woman named Rita, Jack said. She's 67. She's been a friend of the club since before I can remember, and she has a mother-in-law apartment above her garage that she has been trying to rent for 3 months and has not rented because she is extremely particular about who lives in it. He held Lily's gaze. I called her this morning. I told her about you. I told her everything. A pause. She said, and I'm quoting Rita, who does not say things she doesn't mean, she said, send her over. If she's half of what you're describing, the apartment is hers. Lily looked at the key. It's not charity, Jack said. Rita doesn't do charity. She'll want rent first of the month, fair market. You can negotiate with her. She's tough, but she's fair. And she will hold that apartment for 3 weeks while you get on your feet because I asked her to, and she owes me from 2019, which is a story for another time. She looked at the key in her hand, small metal, ordinary, the kind of key that opens a door, the kind of door that has a lock on the inside. Jack, she said, don't argue with me, he said. I told Marcus to tell you I don't have the cardiac capacity for it. She pressed her lips together. I know it's not enough, he said. I know a key and a card isn't. I know it doesn't balance what you did or what it cost you. I'm not trying to balance it. I'm just trying to. He stopped. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, and she saw it again. That thing she'd seen on his face that first day, the thing that lived underneath the steadiness. I spent 8 years not trying, he said, with Melissa. And all that time I told myself I was waiting for the right moment, the right words, the right something. And what I learned is that the waiting is the cost. Every day you don't try is a day you chose not to try, and those days add up and they don't subtract. He looked at her. You didn't wait. You had 22,000 reasons to wait, and you didn't. I want to be more like that. He stopped again. I want the people around me to be more like that. She held the key in her palm and felt the weight of it, which was almost nothing, which was the whole point. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, he said. Go look at the apartment. Then come back and tell me what Rita said. You want me to report back? I want to know what she said. She's going to say something. Lily stood up. She put the key in her jacket pocket next to Reyes's card and Marcus's card, and she felt all three of them there together, the officer, the club, leader, the key. 3 things that a week ago didn't exist in her life. Jack, she said, when you get out of here, she said, I'm going to hold you to that motorcycle thing. He looked at her, that edge of a smile again, real and quick and entirely his. Deal, he said. She walked out. She stood in the hospital corridor and looked at the key in her hand, and she thought about a door with a lock on the inside, a door that was hers. She put the key back in her pocket, and she started moving because that was what you did. You kept moving. You put one foot in front of the other, and you went toward the next thing, and you let the next thing be what it was, without deciding in advance what it could and couldn't mean. She went to meet Rita, and somewhere across the city, in a parking lot off Route 10, a man named Rick Danner sat across a desk from a county investigator and began the long, uncomfortable process of answering for 14 years. And in a hospital bed with too many wires, Jack Mercer closed his eyes and slept better than he had in months. And Lily Carter walked through a city that was beginning slowly and perfectly, the way all real things begin to feel like somewhere she belonged. Rita Espinoza opened the door before Lily had finished knocking. She was exactly 67, exactly as Jack had said, with white hair cut short and practical, and eyes that moved over Lily in one fast, complete assessment, the way some people's eyes do, not unkind, just efficient, like she'd been reading people for 6 decades and had gotten very good at the first sentence. "You're Lily," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Jack called me at 6:30 this morning," Rita said. "I told him 6:30 was an indecent hour. He said he knew. He called anyway." She stepped back from the door. "Come in." The house smelled like coffee and something baking, and Lily followed Rita through it without looking too hard at anything. Because looking too hard at things you want feels dangerous before you know if you can have them. Rita led her through the kitchen and out the back door and up a set of exterior stairs, moving with the efficiency of a woman who doesn't waste motion. And at the top, she produced a key identical to the one in Lily's pocket and opened the door. "Go ahead," Rita said. Lily went in. It was small, one room that served as everything, with a separate bathroom and a window that faced east. So the morning light came in clean and direct and honest. There was a bed, a small table, 2 chairs, a kitchen counter, with a 2-burner stove. Everything was plain and clean and real. She stood in the middle of it and felt the walls around her like something physical. 4 walls, a door, a window, a lock on the inside. $6.50 a month, Rita said from the doorway. "First of the month, cash or check. I don't do late, I don't do excuses." A pause. "I also don't do nonsense. So if Jack told you I'm easy, he was lying." "He said you were tough but fair," Lily said. Rita's expression moved slightly towards something warmer. "He said that, his exact words." Rita looked around the apartment, then at Lily. "He also told me what you did with the money." She held Lily's gaze without sentiment, just directness. "I've known Jack Mercer for 19 years. He does not call me at 6:30 in the morning for people who don't matter." She let that land. 3 weeks. I'll hold it 3 weeks. You get yourself set, you pay. First month we have a deal. Can you do that? Lily thought about $60 a day in the medical building and the job that was hers if she showed up. She thought about 3 weeks. She thought about the math, which was possible, tight but possible. "Yes," she said. "Good," Rita said. "Don't make me regret it." "I won't." Rita left her with the key, and Lily stood alone in the apartment for a long time, not moving, just standing in the particular silence of a space that was hers. She had not had a space that was hers in longer than she wanted to calculate. She stood in it and breathed it in and let it be real before she let herself think about anything else. Then she went back to work. The next 3 weeks were the hardest she could remember since the first weeks after she'd been on her own, and also nothing like those weeks because the hardness was different in kind. Before, hard had meant alone and directionless and without margin for anything. Now hard meant full days, full effort, the specific weight of building something from the bottom up when you know what you're building toward. She worked every shift the medical building offered. When a second building on the same block needed coverage for a sick employee, she took it. She ate cheap and carefully, and she tracked every dollar with the focus of someone who understands that the distance between okay and not okay is measured in very small units. She paid Rita on day 19 $325 for the remainder of the month, cash counted out on the kitchen table. Rita counted it back, nodded. "You've got a week still," she said. "I know," Lily said. "I wanted you to have it." Rita looked at her. Then she said, without ceremony, "There's soup on the stove. Eat something." Lily ate the soup. She visited Jack every few days. He was improving in the visible, incremental way of someone whose body is being persuaded rather than forced. And each visit he was more himself, more present, more opinionated, more willing to argue about small things, which the nurses had begun to interpret as a positive medical indicator. Melissa came twice during those 3 weeks. Lily was there for one of those visits and not the other. And during the one she was there for, she sat in the corner and watched a father and a daughter navigate the careful, uneven territory of beginning again. It was not easy. She could see that the way Melissa's body held tension, she was trying not to show the way Jack chose his words with visible care, the way both of them were working at something that didn't come naturally yet and might not for a long time. But they were working at it, both of them in the same room at the same time. And that was not nothing. That was in fact nearly everything. On the second visit, as Lily was leaving, Melissa caught her in the hallway. "Can I ask you something?" Melissa said. "Yes." "Did he talk about me when you were visiting before I came?" Lily thought about Jack Mercer in his hospital bed saying, "I spent 8 years not trying." She thought about a man carrying $22,000 across the desert with a letter he'd written and rewritten until the words were right. She thought about what it means to try when you don't know if trying will be enough. "Yes," she said, "he talked about you." "What did he say?" "He said he was still trying," Lily said. "That was the whole thing. He said it like it was the most important thing he knew." Melissa looked at her with those gray eyes that were exactly her father's, and something in them shifted. Cracked maybe, or opened the way. Things open when they've been held shut for a long time and finally find a reason to move. "Okay," Melissa said quietly. Just that, just okay, the same way Lily had said it to herself on a desert roadside 10 days ago, meaning something much larger than the word. Lily understood. The call from Marcus came on a Thursday morning, 5 weeks after the night in the motel parking lot. She was eating breakfast in her apartment, those two words still requiring a small, deliberate act of belief every time she used them when the prepaid rang. "Jack's being released today," Marcus said. She put down her fork. "How is he better than the doctors expected, worse than he claims?" A pause. "He wants to have dinner, everyone. You included, and before you say you don't want to be any trouble, I'm going to tell you that if you say that, I'll put you on the phone with Jack, and he'll have something to say about it, and neither of us wants that." She smiled. "What time?" "7, Rosa's place." He paused. "The diner. She's been feeding us for 3 weeks, and she says she'll be offended if Jack's first night out doesn't happen in her restaurant, and Rosa offended is a situation we all prefer to avoid." "I'll be there," Lily said. She was there at 6:50 because she was always early to things that mattered. Rosa seated her at a large table in the back that had been pushed together from 3 smaller ones, and the room filled over the next 30 minutes in the loose, comfortable way of people who know each other well enough to arrive without ceremony. Danny came in with 2 people she didn't know. Karen arrived and sat beside her immediately, already talking. Bet came in last, which Lily had begun to understand was simply how Bet arrived at things last and entirely unapologetic about it, as though punctuality were a convention she found interesting but not personally binding. Then the door opened and Jack Mercer walked in. I was slower than he would have been 6 weeks ago. She could see that in the way he moved the care of it, his body's memory of what had happened, still present in every step. But he was upright and he was himself, and the room did what rooms do when the person they were waiting for arrives. It shifted, reoriented, made space. He saw her immediately. He crossed the room directly to where she was sitting, and he stood there and looked at her, and she looked back at him, and she thought about a parking lot and an ambulance and an envelope, and 4 miles and 30 seconds on a curb and a phone call from Janet Flores, and the sound of 153 engines and a key on a nightstand, and Rita's soup and Melissa's gray eyes saying, "Okay." "You look good," he said. "You look alive," she said. He laughed, the real laugh, the large one, the one that came from somewhere genuine, and she had not heard it in person before, only its ghost in the hospital room, and the real version was better. He sat down beside her, moving carefully into the chair, and the dinner began. What happened at that table for the next 3 hours was ordinary, in the way that only extraordinary things ever get to be. Ordinary because you have to earn that ease, that specific, comfortable warmth. The way a table of people who have been through something together earns the right to laugh about small things and argue about nothing and let the evening go long. She ate Rosa's food, and she drank Rosa's coffee, and she talked to Karen about Albuquerque, and to Bet about nothing in particular, and to Danny about whether the prepaid phone was still working, which it was, and to Marcus about the investigation, which was ongoing, which would take time, which was exactly what real processes took. And she talked to Jack, mostly about small things. His daughter, his plans, which the doctors had modified significantly, in which he was negotiating with them, in the way he negotiated everything from a position of maximum stubbornness, tempered by just enough pragmatism to make it sustainable. His bike, which Danny had been keeping, the road which he'd get back to, eventually maybe different roads, maybe slower, but the road. At one point late in the evening, he said, "You still want to learn to ride? You said you'd teach me," she said. "I did say that." He looked at her. "I'm going to need a few months before I'm back on the bike. Doctor's orders, which for the record I think are overly cautious, but Marcus made me promise to actually listen for once in my life." A pause. "But when I'm back, you want your first lesson to be from me, or you want to learn from someone who's actually patient?" She thought about it. "You," as she said. He nodded, like that was the right answer. Good. What happened next was the twist she didn't see coming, even though in retrospect she should have, because the people at this table were exactly the kind of people who would do this kind of thing. Marcus stood up. The table went quiet, not because he called for it, just because Marcus Hale's standing is a thing that commands attention without requiring effort. He looked at Lily. "We want to ask you something," he said. "And this is a real question, not a polite question, which means you can say no and we will respect it completely." He paused. "There's a women's shelter 2 miles from here, St. Catherine's. They've been trying to staff a cleaning and facilities supervisor position for 4 months. The woman who runs it, Director Paulson, is a friend. The job comes with full hours benefits and an address, a real one on paper, the kind that goes on a W-2. He looked at her carefully. "It is not a charity position. It is a real job that needs to be done by someone good at it. We told her about your work history and your, let's call it, your demonstrated commitment to showing up when things are hard." A pause. "She'd like to meet you, if you want." The table was very quiet. Lily looked at Marcus. She looked at Danny, who was studying his coffee with the focused attention of a man trying to appear uninvested. She looked at Karen, who was not pretending at all, and was watching Lily directly with the expression of someone who wants something for another person badly enough to feel it physically. She looked at Bet, who looked back at her with those grandmother eyes that had the whole history of the world in them. She looked at Jack. Jack was looking at his plate, and she understood immediately and completely that this had been his idea, and he didn't want her to know it was his idea, and he was doing a genuinely poor job of pretending otherwise for someone who was usually much better at keeping his face still. "Jack," she said. He looked up. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know what you're, Jack." He held her gaze, and the edge of the smile appeared real and quick, and entirely his, the one she'd first seen in a hospital room full of machines and had been looking for every time since. "You're welcome," he said. She met with Director Paulson the following Monday. The woman was 55 and direct and ran the shelter with the particular combination of compassion and clear-eyed practicality that the work demanded. And she asked hard questions, and Lily answered them honestly. And at the end of the interview, Paulson said, "I want to ask you one thing off the record." Lily nodded. "You had $22,000 in your hands," Paulson said. "With nothing, with nobody watching. Why did you give it back?" Lily had been asked this in different forms many times now, and each time she'd answered it a little differently because the question had layers, and the layers kept revealing themselves. But sitting across from Director Paulson in a shelter that existed for the same reason Lily had needed shelters, she found the truest version she'd arrived at yet. "Because I needed to know what I'd do," she said, "when everything was on the line and nobody was watching. I needed to know who I was in that moment." She paused. "And I didn't want to find out I was someone who took the easy thing." Paulson looked at her for a long moment. "You start Monday," she said. Lily called Marcus from the sidewalk outside. He answered on the second ring. "She said yes," he said. She could hear the attempt to sound merely curious. "She said yes," Lily said. A pause. Then in a voice that was quieter than his usual voice and more real, "Good. That's good, Lily." She stood on that sidewalk with the morning sun on her face and the phone in her hand and her key in her pocket and a start date and an address that would go on a W-2. And she thought about a Thursday morning in a rundown motel when everything had been different and nothing had been certain. And she had stood at the hardest door of her life with 22,000 reasons to walk the wrong way. She thought about walking the right way instead. She thought about what it had cost her and what it had built her and all the things that lived on the other side of that choice. Jack and Marcus and Danny and Karen and Bet and Rita and her soup and Melissa saying, I'm working on it in a shelter bed and $60 a day in an apartment with a lock on the inside, and now this a start date, a real one, the kind that goes on paper. She thought about Carol, who had told her the most important things she knew at exactly the right time, and she sensed something toward Carol's memory that wasn't quite a prayer, but was adjacent to one, a specific directed thank you into whatever part of the universe Carol now occupied. 6 weeks later, Richard Danner was formally charged with 3 counts of fraud and 2 counts of wage theft with additional charges pending investigation. The Desert Sun Motel was placed under new management by the property's actual owners, who had been receiving falsified reports for a decade and were, to put it mildly, not pleased. Officer Reyes received a commendation for the investigation. Patricia Whelan told a journalist from the county paper that it was one of the most straightforward cases of long-term exploitation she'd prosecuted undone, ultimately by a single 19-year-old who refused to be complicit. Lily read the article on her phone in her apartment, sitting at her small table in her morning light. She read it once, put the phone down, and went to work. She was good at the job at St. Catherine's. She had always been good at this kind of work, the physical, methodical, do it, right, the first-time work, but at St. Catherine's, she understood it differently because she knew what the building was for, she knew who slept in it and what they were carrying, and knowing made the work matter in a way work hadn't always mattered. She cleaned the rooms with the same care she'd given room 14 on the worst morning of her recent life, and she did it because the people inside those rooms deserved to have it done carefully. Paulson noticed. Paulson said so plainly, which was how Paulson communicated everything. Jack was released on a full recovery plan that he was, by all accounts, following better than anyone had expected, which Danny attributed to Melissa's influence, and Marcus attributed to the threat of further cardiac events, and Jack attributed to the fact that he had things to do, and dying would be inconvenient. He called Lily on a Tuesday morning in October, 9 weeks after his release. I'm back on the bike, he said. How does it feel, she said. Like coming home, he said, without hesitation. Certain. Saturday morning early, I'll pick you up. She was standing outside her building at 6:45 on Saturday when she heard it, that specific resonance. The one she now recognized, the way you recognize a voice, the way you recognize something that has become familiar enough to feel like yours. Jack pulled up. He looked not the same as before, not entirely. Some things the body keeps after that kind of event and doesn't give back. But he looked like himself. He looked like a man on a motorcycle who knew exactly where he was. He handed her the helmet. You ready? Hi, he said. She put it on. She got on the back of the bike. She felt the engine catch beneath her, that vibration in the chest, that second heartbeat, the one she'd first felt on the back of Danny's bike the night they'd ridden to the motel, and everything had changed. Ready? She said. They rode out into the early morning, the city still quiet around them, the light coming in from the east, the way light does in the desert, clean and direct and honest, the way it had always come in through her apartment window, the way it had come in when she'd stood in that room for the first time and let the walls be real. She held on, and she felt the wind, and she did not think about where she was going specifically because the direction was less important than the motion. And the motion was less important than the fact of being here alive and moving with someone who had decided she was worth finding. 4 months ago, she had been a girl with $90 and nowhere to sleep. She had stood at the hardest door of her life, and she had opened it in the right direction. And what came through that door? What followed a choice made in a dirty motel room on a Thursday morning in Arizona was not a reward, not a transaction, not the universe balancing its books. It was something truer than that and harder to name, and more worth having, a life built from the fact of who she had chosen to be when nobody was watching and everything was on the line. She had chosen right, and right had chosen her back.